While I was out of town for just one weekend, my HOA decided to borrow my boat for their private party. They thought no one would ever find out, until the Coast Guard pulled them over in the middle of the lake. That's when everything came crashing down. Welcome to HOA Justice Real Stories, the place where truth hits harder than rules. We'll continue the story soon. But first, tell me, which country are you watching this from? Comment below, I want to see how far this story travels. It all started on a bright summer morning, the kind that made the lake shimmer like a sheet of glass. The neighborhood was quiet, deceptively peaceful, with only the sound of sprinklers and the occasional bark of a dog echoing across the cul-de-sac. The kind of day when you trust your community and everyone in it. For years, I had lived in this lakeside HOA neighborhood, a place that promised order, beauty, and safety. The kind of place where lawns were measured, fences were regulated, and every house looked like it came out of the same brochure. It was the kind of control that made some people feel comfortable. Others, like me, tolerated it because of the view, that vast stretch of blue water right behind my home, where my prized possession sat anchored, a sleek, white and blue motorboat that I had restored myself over the years. That boat wasn't just metal and fiberglass, it was my escape. My peace. My weekends. I had poured my savings into maintaining it, cleaning, repairing, polishing until it gleamed like new. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it was mine. Everyone also knew the HOA's rules were strict about watercraft, no communal use, no sharing, no exceptions. Especially not without written permission. But among all the residents, one person believed those rules didn't apply to her, Linda, the HOA president. Linda was the kind of woman who smiled with her teeth but never her eyes. Mid-50s, always wearing a visor, clipboard in hand, and a look that screamed authority. She didn't just enforce the rules, she was the rules. Her power came from intimidation, fines, warnings, letters, and whispers. No one crossed her, because she always had a way to make life miserable if you did. When I told the board I'd be out of town for a week for work, Linda smiled politely, saying, "We'll keep an eye on things." It sounded like reassurance at the time. I didn't realize it was a threat. The first 2 days of my trip went smoothly. I checked security cameras occasionally, saw nothing unusual. The house was quiet. But on the third day, something strange happened. My motion alerts triggered multiple times in a row. At first, I thought it was just raccoons or maybe a storm. But when I checked the footage later, I noticed figures walking near my dock, in the early evening, when no one should have been there. The footage was grainy from the low light, but I could make out silhouettes, one woman with short blonde hair, wearing a visor. My stomach sank. Linda. I tried calling a neighbor to see what was going on, but no one picked up. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just inspecting something near the waterline. She always did things like that, petty inspections, surprise visits, routine checks. Still, something about it didn't sit right. When I returned 4 days later, the first thing I noticed was the tire tracks leading down my driveway toward the dock. Deep, muddy, and fresh. My gate latch had been broken. And when I looked toward the water, my boat wasn't there. At first, I froze. My mind went blank. My boat, gone. I rushed to the dock, looking around frantically, my heart pounding in my chest. I called the HOA office, but there was no answer. I called Linda directly. Straight to voicemail. Panic set in. I contacted the Marina Patrol, reporting my boat missing. They took down the details and promised to investigate. For the next few hours, I paced the house, refreshing my phone, waiting for updates that never came. By nightfall, the lake was silent again, no sound of motors, no lights on the water. Just emptiness. The next morning, I found out from a neighbor, an older man who liked to fish early, that he had seen something strange 2 nights ago. A group of people, loud music, flashing lights, and a party happening on the water. He thought it was a private event. He even noticed Linda among them, holding a drink, laughing, like she owned the place. That was when everything clicked. She had taken my boat. My boat. Without permission, without even a word. Used it as her private playground. My disbelief quickly turned to rage. I stormed into the HOA office that morning, but of course, Linda wasn't there. Her assistant nervously claimed she was out on personal business. The same phrase they always used when she was dodging accountability. So I left a written report, attaching photos of the tracks, the broken gate, and a copy of my marina report. Hours turned into a day, and the silence from Linda's end was deafening. I thought she'd try to cover it up, or maybe spin it as a misunderstanding. But what happened next went far beyond anything I could have imagined. The next afternoon, I got a call from the Coast Guard. My heart stopped as soon as I heard the words, "We've located your vessel." They explained that during a routine patrol on the lake, they had stopped a boat for overcapacity, loud music, and operating without registration papers. The passengers, several members of my HOA board, had been detained temporarily for questioning. The boat was identified as mine. According to the report, Linda had frozen on the spot when they asked whose boat it was. She stammered, claimed it was part of a neighborhood event. But when they checked the ID tag and registration, it led directly back to me, the rightful owner. The Coast Guard had no patience for excuses. They issued citations, impounded the boat, and took statements from everyone on board. My blood boiled, but I also couldn't help but feel a dark sense of satisfaction. Linda's arrogance had finally caught up with her. She had crossed a line she couldn't talk her way out of. When I went to retrieve the boat later that evening, I could still see the remnants of her chaos, confetti, empty bottles, and scuff marks on the seats. It wasn't just a violation of trust, it was vandalism. But what I didn't know then was that Linda wasn't about to give up quietly. The embarrassment she faced that day would only fuel her next move, one that would drag the entire HOA into a scandal bigger than anyone expected. The calm before the storm was over. The real war with the HOA was about to begin. When word spread that the Coast Guard had pulled over an HOA party on a stolen boat, the entire neighborhood lit up with whispers. Everyone had an opinion, but no one dared to speak too loudly. After all, in this community, speaking against the HOA was social suicide. But this time, the gossip wasn't about overgrown lawns or trash cans left out overnight, it was about the president herself. Linda. For a few brief hours, the neighborhood's illusion of order cracked. The queen of rules, the woman who fined people for leaving their sprinklers on too long, had been caught red-handed breaking federal boating laws. Yet somehow, by the next morning, the HOA office was strangely quiet. No apologies. No accountability. No acknowledgement that anything had happened at all. That's when I realized, Linda wasn't going to take the blame. She was going to bury the truth. The first sign came in the form of an official HOA email. Polite, sterile, and carefully worded. It claimed there had been an incident involving community members on the lake and that certain misunderstandings had been exaggerated by outside authorities. It was pure spin. No mention of my name. No mention of my boat. Just a vague reassurance that the HOA board is cooperating fully with local authorities, a phrase that translated to damage control. By mid-morning, I went to the HOA office to confront them in person. The walls were lined with framed certificates and faded photographs of ribbon cuttings, symbols of authority that suddenly felt meaningless. Linda was in her office, door open, acting as if nothing had happened. Her desk was spotless, her smile rehearsed. She greeted me with fake warmth, like a politician mid-campaign. On the surface, she seemed calm. But I noticed her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her papers, the kind of nervous gesture that betrayed guilt. On the wall behind her, a new notice had been pinned, a community lake safety reminder, written by none other than Linda herself. Irony at its peak. When I mentioned the Coast Guard's report and the damage to my boat, she didn't even flinch. She spoke in circles, deflecting responsibility, insisting the whole thing was a misunderstanding and that the HOA had every intention of compensating for any inconvenience. Inconvenience. That was her word for it. But there was no mention of repair costs, no apology, and certainly no explanation for why she and her friends were drinking champagne on my property. It was like trying to argue with a brick wall that smiled back. Later that day, I received another email from the HOA. This one was more aggressive, a reminder that all boats must comply with community safety standards and be secured appropriately to prevent unauthorized use. It was almost laughable. They were trying to flip the narrative, to make it sound like I was the irresponsible one. The victim turned into the problem. It was classic HOA politics, and Linda was the master of it. Neighbors who used to wave at me now avoided eye contact. Some whispered that I had lent the boat out for the event and was now just looking for a payout. Others believed Linda's version, that I was exaggerating to get her removed from the board. It was a strategy as old as corruption itself, confuse the crowd until they no longer know who to trust. But what Linda didn't realize was that the Coast Guard's report wasn't just paperwork, it was evidence. And I had a copy of it. That night, I sat at my desk going through everything, the photos, the video clips from my security camera, and the written statement from the officer who called me. It was all there in black and white, the boat's registration number, the citation details, and the names of everyone on board, including Linda's. The next morning, I printed everything and delivered copies to each HOA board member's mailbox. No accusations, no commentary, just facts. Within hours, my phone began to buzz. One board member called me privately, whispering that they had no idea Linda had used the HOA's event insurance form to claim the party was an approved community function. She had forged signatures and filed fake paperwork to make it appear legitimate. Her arrogance was breathtaking. She hadn't just broken the law, she had committed fraud in the name of the neighborhood. That night, I noticed 2 HOA trucks parked down the street, idling with their lights off. Someone was watching my house. Whether it was intimidation or paranoia, I couldn't tell. But one thing was certain, Linda was nervous. By the end of the week, the HOA board called an emergency closed meeting. Residents weren't allowed to attend, but news leaked out quickly. Linda had tried to persuade the board to declare the Coast Guard report invalid due to jurisdictional errors. When that failed, she suggested suspending me for defamation against an HOA official. It was absurd, and yet, it almost worked. 3 of the 7 board members sided with her, too afraid to oppose the woman who controlled their fines and approvals. But 2 others demanded an independent review. They knew the scandal was too big to hide. The community's perfect image was cracking, and behind that glossy facade, panic was spreading. That same evening, I received a call from an anonymous number. A voice I didn't recognize, quiet, shaky, almost fearful. It was one of the HOA's part-time staff members. They told me something that made my blood run cold. Apparently, before the Coast Guard stopped them, Linda had made a phone call to a marina official, trying to register my boat under a temporary HOA community use permit. She'd actually tried to reclassify ownership after taking it, claiming it was part of the HOA's shared amenities. It was blatant theft, disguised as policy. But the moment the Coast Guard pulled alongside, Linda froze. Witnesses said she went pale, stammering, pretending to make a phone call, claiming it was for community outreach. Everyone on the boat knew then that she was in trouble. Now, she was trying to erase every trace of that night. The next morning, a notice appeared on every mailbox. Unauthorized recordings, photography, or publication of HOA matters will result in penalties. That was Linda's move, trying to silence me before I could go public. But I wasn't backing down anymore. I uploaded a short video online, no names, no accusations, just the footage of the Coast Guard boat flashing its lights near mine, and the sound of officers calling out the registration number. Within 24 hours, it went viral locally. Comments poured in. People started recognizing the lake, the neighborhood, the story. The HOA's polished image began to crumble. Linda's name was now circulating online, though I hadn't even mentioned it. Neighbors started demanding answers. Board members began to distance themselves. The story was out of her control. And that was the one thing Linda could never stand, losing control. The mask she'd worn for years was beginning to slip, and beneath it was a woman desperate to save her power. But she wasn't done yet. The next move she made would turn this scandal into an all-out war, one that would spill into legal threats, public humiliation, and a shocking confrontation on the lake itself. When the video started spreading through local Facebook groups and neighborhood forums, it was like a match dropped into dry grass. Within a day, everyone within 5 miles of the lake had heard about the HOA president caught partying on someone else's boat. The clip was short, shaky, grainy, but powerful. The flashing lights of the Coast Guard patrol boat illuminated the dark water like a spotlight on guilt. It didn't need commentary. The image spoke for itself. At first, the HOA pretended not to notice. They ignored it, hoping the noise would fade, that people would move on. But it didn't. The whispers grew louder, and Linda's name began surfacing in every post, every rumor. By the end of the week, the story had outgrown the neighborhood. It was spreading beyond, into local boating groups, online news outlets, and even the homeowners of nearby lakeside communities who were fed up with HOA abuse. For someone like Linda, whose power relied on control and reputation, that kind of exposure was poison. And she wasn't the type to stay quiet and take it. That's when the retaliation began. It started small, a notice taped to my front door. Violation notice, improper dock maintenance. According to the paper, my dock posed a safety hazard and needed to be repaired immediately. It was absurd. My dock had passed inspection 2 months earlier, with Linda herself signing off on it. The violation came with a $250 fine and a threat of further penalties if not resolved within 10 days. The next day, another notice appeared, this time about my lawn. Exceeds HOA height limit. It was barely an inch taller than regulation. Another $150 fine. Then came one about my mailbox paint being faded. Another about the color of my shutters. Each one was more ridiculous than the last, but the message was clear: Linda was weaponizing the HOA to punish me. When I called the office, the receptionist nervously claimed the fines were routine, part of an annual enforcement cycle. The timing, though, was too precise to ignore. She wanted to drown me in bureaucracy. If she couldn't erase the truth, she'd make me pay for speaking it. For a few days, I debated what to do next. Part of me wanted to fight every fine, every letter, every petty accusation. Another part wanted to expose her completely, to make her lose the power she'd built over everyone. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became, Linda wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to send a message to everyone watching, that defiance comes with consequences. And that made me even more determined to fight back. So, I documented everything. Every violation notice, every email, every late-night photo of HOA trucks idling by the street. I saved it all. But Linda's next move caught me off guard. One morning, I walked out to find a large orange sticker on my dock, property under review, access restricted. It looked official, printed with the HOA logo. According to the posted notice, the HOA had temporarily suspended dock privileges pending investigation. In plain words, they were banning me from my own property. I laughed out loud, the kind of laughter that hides exhaustion and disbelief. Linda wasn't just retaliating, she was escalating. That same evening, I received an HOA certified letter. Inside was a formal warning accusing me of defamation and harassment against a community official, citing online misconduct, referring to my viral video. The letter stated that if I didn't remove all unauthorized content within 48 hours, the HOA would take legal action. It was a scare tactic, classic Linda. But the problem for her was that the video didn't show her name or face. It wasn't defamation. It was truth. So instead of deleting it, I shared another clip, this time, a short, quiet recording of the damage done to my boat, broken glass, torn seats, scratches along the hull. I didn't say a word. I just let the image tell the story. Within hours, the views doubled. That's when things turned dark. A few days later, someone left a note under my door. No HOA logo. No signature. Just one sentence written in block letters. Stop before you regret it. It was enough to make the air in my house feel heavier. I started checking my cameras more often, noticing unfamiliar cars passing by late at night. The line between intimidation and threat had been crossed. But the truth was on my side, and I wasn't backing down. I called my attorney, explained everything, and sent him the documents. He laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictably stupid. He told me the HOA had no authority to suspend property access, and every fine they issued could be challenged for bias and retaliation. He suggested I start preparing a formal case. But before the legal system could move, the neighborhood itself began to turn. The residents were tired of fear. Tired of Linda's control. My story had opened their eyes. One by one, people began speaking out, privately at first, through messages, then openly at board meetings. A few shared their own stories, false fines, intimidation, favoritism. Things that had always been brushed aside suddenly had proof, me. But Linda wasn't going to surrender quietly. During the next HOA meeting, she stood before the crowd, polished and poised, pretending to be the victim. She blamed internet misinformation, claiming she had been wrongfully portrayed by malicious editing. And then, in a move that shocked everyone, she introduced a proposal to increase HOA surveillance funding, more cameras, more patrols, more oversight. It was control disguised as protection. But this time, the room didn't applaud. The silence was her answer. That night, one of the board members, the same one who had supported an independent review, reached out to me. He said Linda was panicking. The HOA's insurance company had contacted her after the viral video. If it turned out that she used HOA authority for personal gain, their policy could be voided. That meant legal and financial ruin, not just for her, but for the entire board. And that's when her behavior changed completely. She became desperate. Erratic. She started patrolling the lake in her golf cart at night, shining a flashlight toward my dock, muttering about safety inspections. Neighbors saw her pacing near the HOA office, making calls in a panic. Her empire was cracking, and she could feel it. But then came the moment that changed everything. Late one evening, around sunset, I was standing by my dock, recording footage for my attorney. Across the lake, I saw something moving, a figure at the marina. It was Linda. She was standing near my boat again, this time speaking with two men in uniforms, local security contractors, the kind the HOA sometimes hired for events. She was pointing toward my property, gesturing angrily. I couldn't hear what she said, but I knew what it meant. She was planning something. I quietly filmed her, documenting every second. She didn't see me, not yet. As the sun dipped below the water and the lights reflected on the rippling surface, I realized one thing: Linda wasn't done trying to control the narrative. She was about to make her boldest move yet, and this time, she dragged the entire HOA down with her. The days after the Coast Guard incident felt like living in a slow-motion disaster. The HOA president, Linda, had gone from the confident, clipboard-carrying ruler of the neighborhood to a trembling mess behind closed blinds. Her carefully constructed world, one built on fear, control, and fake authority, had finally begun to crumble. But the strange thing about downfall is that it never happens all at once. It unravels quietly, piece by piece. At first, it started with whispers. Neighbors who used to stay silent suddenly started asking questions. Who authorized the HOA to use private property? Who paid for the gas and decorations from the HOA fund? And why did the Coast Guard report say the registration numbers on my boat had been temporarily covered during the party? The whispers turned into phone calls. The phone calls turned into emails. And within a week, the entire neighborhood had gone from blind obedience to open outrage. Linda's once perfect smile had vanished. The woman who used to walk the streets confidently with her clipboard now hid behind tinted windows. Even her closest board members began to distance themselves, quietly deleting emails, wiping messages, pretending they had no part in it. But for me, the real moment of realization came when I received a letter, not from Linda, but from the HOA's insurance company. They wanted to discuss liability concerns over unauthorized use of private property. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about neighborhood politics anymore. This was going to become legal. The HOA had crossed a line they couldn't erase. They hadn't just broken trust, they'd broken the law. Still, the strangest thing wasn't what they did, it was how quickly they turned on each other. Board meetings that were once calm turned into shouting matches. The treasurer accused Linda of falsifying approvals. Linda accused her vice president of going behind her back. Every person who had once stood together under the banner of community order now tried to save themselves. The image of unity cracked wide open. I watched from a distance, recording every moment, documenting every letter and notice that came my way. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the loud, emotional way I had been before. I was calm, focused. Because I knew exactly how this story was going to end. And I wasn't going to stop it. A week later, something unexpected happened. A man from the HOA's maintenance crew stopped by my house early in the morning. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder as he spoke. He said he'd worked on the dock that night, helped prepare Linda's private party. Then he told me something that sent chills down my spine. Linda had ordered them to change the name on the boat's registry stickers using black duct tape before taking it out. She didn't want the Coast Guard or anyone else identifying whose boat it was. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. They knew exactly what they were doing. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Linda wasn't just using my boat, she was covering her tracks. She wanted to enjoy her secret night on the water without accountability, assuming no one would ever know. But when the Coast Guard pulled them over, that cover-up turned into a spotlight. Every lie they had told was now visible under flashing blue lights. The next HOA meeting was unlike anything the community had ever seen. Dozens of residents showed up, not to listen, but to demand answers. The usually calm and well-decorated community center was filled with tension, arms crossed, phones recording. Linda stood at the podium, her face pale, makeup cracked from stress. She tried to speak about misunderstandings and clerical errors, but the crowd wasn't buying it. One resident shouted that the HOA had used community funds to buy alcohol for the party. Another said her own boat had been moved without permission. Each accusation hit like a wave, drowning Linda's attempts to stay afloat. The meeting ended in chaos. Linda stormed out. Her board followed in silence. And by the next morning, half of them had resigned. But I didn't feel victory, not yet. Because I knew Linda wasn't done. There's always one last act in a story like this, a desperate move to protect what little power remains. And sure enough, 2 nights later, I saw her again. Through my window, across the dark lake, a small light flickered inside the HOA office. It was long past midnight. At first, I thought maybe it was just a janitor or a timer light. But then the figure moved, someone pacing, opening drawers, pulling files. It was Linda. She was inside the office, alone, trying to destroy evidence. I grabbed my phone and started recording from across the lake. The faint light illuminated her hand stuffing documents into a trash bin. Then, a spark. She was trying to burn them. The smoke drifted upward, barely visible against the night sky. But she didn't know I had already sent copies of everything to my attorney. Her last attempt to hide the truth was useless. By the next morning, word had spread. Photos of the late-night fire were everywhere. Neighbors started demanding an official investigation. The HOA's financial books were seized. The insurance company backed out. And Linda, the woman who once ruled this neighborhood, was now facing criminal charges. But the story wasn't over. Because what came next wasn't just about punishment. It was about what happens when control, pride, and deceit finally collide with truth. And that collision was about to hit harder than anyone expected. By the time the sun rose over the lake that morning, the entire community was awake, not because of an alarm clock, but because of the chaos that had erupted overnight. Word had spread like wildfire. A local news outlet had picked up the story. The headline was short but devastating. HOA president accused of misusing homeowner's boat for private party, investigation underway. The article didn't need names. Everyone in the area knew exactly who it was about. Linda's face wasn't shown, but her description was unmistakable: female HOA president of a lakeside community, involved in Coast Guard incident. That single line was enough to destroy years of carefully crafted image and control. For someone who had ruled through fear and perfection, this was public humiliation on a scale she had never experienced. By midday, I watched from my front porch as reporters began parking at the entrance of the neighborhood, cameras flashing, drones buzzing overhead. The HOA office was locked, blinds drawn. Residents stood outside whispering, watching, recording. The queen of the neighborhood had fallen silent. Inside her home, the lights stayed off for hours. Her car didn't move. The same woman who used to march up and down the street inspecting mailboxes was now hiding behind her curtains, afraid to face the very people she once controlled. But while she hid, the investigation continued. The state HOA regulatory board had received multiple complaints, not just from me, but from residents emboldened by the scandal. They began looking into her tenure, her finances, and her use of HOA funds. And that's when the real truth started to unravel. It turned out the boat party wasn't her first offense, just her most public one. Linda had been using HOA resources for personal luxury for years. Expenses labeled as community maintenance were actually charges for private catering, entertainment, even a landscaper who only worked at her house. Every receipt told a story. Every fake invoice revealed another lie. The board members, now terrified of being implicated, began leaking information anonymously. Emails, documents, and internal memos poured out. It was like a dam had broken. The HOA's accountant finally confessed that he had been pressured to alter balance sheets, that Linda had threatened to fire him if he didn't comply. Her system of control had relied not just on intimidation, but silence. And now that silence was gone. Meanwhile, the damage to my boat had been fully assessed. The repair bill was enormous, thousands of dollars in upholstery, mechanical cleaning, and repainting. The Coast Guard's report clearly identified the HOA's involvement, which meant Linda's party had crossed into criminal territory, unauthorized use of property and reckless endangerment. My attorney filed claims immediately, one civil, one criminal. The moment she was served, witnesses said Linda broke down in her driveway. No more polished smile, no clipboard. Just a woman realizing her entire world was collapsing piece by piece. Neighbors stood silently as the process server handed her the papers. No one defended her. Not one person spoke up. The same people she'd once manipulated now watched her fall, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. That evening, I stood by the water again. The lake was calm, quiet, reflective, almost poetic after months of tension. My boat sat docked, still bearing the scars of what had happened. For the first time, I felt peace returning to the neighborhood. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because just as the sun set, I saw movement by the HOA office. 2 vehicles, one belonging to the county sheriff, the other unmarked. A pair of officers stepped out, holding documents. They entered the office and didn't come out for nearly an hour. By the time they did, they weren't alone. Linda was with them. Her expression was blank, drained of the arrogance she once wore like armor. She wasn't handcuffed, but her posture told the story, shoulders slumped, eyes down. The officers guided her to the car, cameras flashing in the distance. The entire neighborhood watched from windows and driveways. No one spoke. The only sound was the lake breeze brushing past the trees and the faint click of camera shutters. It was over. In the following days, the full truth became public. The HOA had been under audit for months, but the Coast Guard incident had accelerated everything. Linda was charged with multiple counts of misuse of funds and unauthorized property use. The state board suspended her license permanently. The community voted to dissolve the existing HOA leadership and rebuild from scratch under new management. It was chaos, but the kind of chaos that comes before freedom. Neighbors began talking again, laughing, living without fear of fines or threats. Driveways that were once spotless and silent now had kids' bikes and chalk drawings. The neighborhood finally felt like a community again, not a prison of appearances. As for me, I decided not to sell the house, though I had thought about it many times. I stayed because this was home. Because the water still called to me, and because, deep down, I wanted to see the place heal. A few weeks later, I took the boat back onto the lake for the first time since everything had happened. The engine purred softly, the reflection of the setting sun rippling across the waves. There was no noise, no drama, just calm. And as I steered out toward open water, I realized something important. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with a bang, it comes with stillness. With peace after the storm. The HOA's tyranny had ended not because someone yelled louder, but because truth had been louder than all the lies combined. Linda had ruled through control, but she lost everything the moment she tried to take what wasn't hers. And somewhere, beneath that calm lake surface, her reflection, once proud and untouchable, was gone for good. But as I pulled back toward the dock that night, a single light flickered in the distance, from the old HOA office. The building was supposed to be empty. A figure moved inside briefly, then disappeared. Maybe it was just a new board member organizing files. Or maybe Linda had come back for something she'd left behind. Either way, one thing was certain. The water might look calm again, but stories like this never end quietly. The night after the arrest felt strange. The air was heavy with relief, but also uncertainty, the kind of silence that follows a storm, when everything is calm but nothing feels settled. For the first time in months, the lake was completely still. The HOA office stood dark and empty, its once glowing lights replaced by the dull reflection of street lamps rippling across the water. The sign that used to read, Lakeside Community Association, hung crooked, one corner broken, swaying in the wind. To everyone else, it was over. The Queen had fallen, justice had been served, and the neighborhood was finally free. But for me, it didn't feel finished. Not yet. Because in a story like this, closure doesn't come with a courtroom verdict or a viral post, it comes when the truth is completely uncovered. And deep down, I knew there was still something left beneath the surface. It began with a letter. A week after Linda's arrest, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page, an old HOA ledger sheet, dated nearly a year before the boat incident. It listed marina maintenance fees, a large sum of money, withdrawn directly from the HOA fund. But the bank routing number wasn't the HOA's. It was Linda's personal account. Someone wanted me to know, someone on the inside. It confirmed what I'd always suspected, the boat party wasn't just an act of arrogance. It was part of a much bigger scheme, a trail of stolen funds and hidden payments that Linda had quietly siphoned for years. The boat party was simply the night everything finally spilled into the open. I forwarded the document to my attorney, who passed it along to investigators. Days later, they confirmed multiple new accounts tied to Linda, each used to launder HOA dues into maintenance expenses that never existed. The scandal deepened, and this time, it wasn't just a local story. It made state news. But the more public the story became, the more distant I felt from it. Neighbors who once avoided me now stopped by to say thank you, for standing up, for speaking out, for not backing down. The same dock where Linda had once trespassed became the neighborhood's unofficial meeting spot. Kids fished there, couples sat by the water at dusk, and people laughed again. The HOA's hold had finally broken. Yet even with peace returning, I couldn't shake the memory of that night, when I'd seen a light flicker inside the supposedly empty HOA office. I told myself it was just imagination, a trick of reflection on the lake. But one evening, curiosity got the better of me. It was just after sunset when I walked toward the old HOA building. The path was quiet, lined with fallen leaves and the faint hum of crickets. The front door was locked, but one of the windows was cracked open slightly. A thin beam of light shone through from inside. I called out, but no answer. Peering through the window, I saw the faint glow of a desk lamp. Papers scattered across the floor, files overturned, and on the far wall, a framed photograph of the original HOA founders, including Linda, now tilted sideways. And then, I saw movement. Someone was inside. The figure was hunched over the desk, flipping through old binders, quickly, desperately, as if searching for something specific. It wasn't Linda, this person was younger, wearing a hoodie, face hidden. I recognized the silhouette after a moment, one of the junior board members, a man who had voted with Linda during the last meeting. Before I could say anything, he stuffed a file into a bag and slipped out the back door, vanishing into the darkness. That's when it hit me. This wasn't over. The investigation had taken down Linda, but she hadn't acted alone. There were still people tied to her, people who had helped, signed papers, looked the other way, and now wanted to erase their tracks before the auditors found them. And as I stood there, the glow of the lake reflecting against the window, I realized something ironic. The HOA that once claimed to protect the community had been the biggest threat to it all along. But that night, I made a promise to myself, I wasn't going to let it happen again. The next morning, I handed the footage from my security camera to the authorities. They confirmed it, the man I'd seen was under investigation for financial collusion. It led to another arrest, and more of Linda's old allies quietly resigned. The rot was deeper than anyone thought, but piece by piece, it was finally being cleared out. Weeks passed, and the season began to change. The heat of summer faded into the cool calm of early autumn. The HOA office was sold to a new management company. The old sign was removed, replaced with a simple, clean one that read, Lakeside Neighborhood Association, under new direction. There were no more late-night patrols, no fines for mailbox colors, no threats over dock paint. People started decorating their yards freely again. Laughter replaced tension. For the first time in years, the lake truly belonged to the residents, not the rules. And me? I finally felt at peace. One morning, I took my boat out for a quiet ride. The water was glassy, calm, reflecting the golden sunrise. As I drifted farther from shore, the world felt weightless, the noise, the stress, the anger, all left behind on land. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the manipulation, the revenge, and how one act of greed had torn apart a community that was supposed to be perfect. And as I looked across the water, I understood something simple but powerful. Power built on control always collapses under truth. Linda's downfall wasn't just about a stolen boat. It was about the illusion that authority can silence accountability. But when ordinary people stand up, even against a system designed to intimidate them, the balance shifts. And that's exactly what happened here. As I steered the boat back toward shore, I caught one final glimpse of the old HOA dock in the distance. Empty now. Weathered, but peaceful. For months, that dock had been a symbol of control, a place of fear, fines, and judgment. But now, it was just wood and water again. No more rules. No more clipboards. No more Linda. Just freedom. When they took my boat, they thought they were stealing a moment of joy. But what they really did was expose everything they'd built on lies. And in the end, the tide always turns. The water remembers.